I think we are rolling. So, Nancy Zeltsman, welcome to the interview, How We Practice. I appreciate you being here so much and taking the time to do this.
Thank you for asking me.
Of course. And so we'll just jump right into it. So my first question for everyone when I do these is, in your mind, what is practice? How would you define it, or what does it mean to you now?
That is such a deep and broad question. I never thought of that. The first thing that popped in my head was just, it's like the personal time to make sense of something and to find your way into a piece, or it could be even an exercise task or something, but just to feel what it means and what it's going to bring you mentally and physically. In the case of an exercise, I suppose. And in a case of a piece, like you're entering a whole world. And well, I mean, I'm thinking mainly from the standpoint of interpreting written music. That's what I do the most. You know, this is such an open-ended question. Of course, sure. I could open a score that says begin by improvising like you hear distant bells, or, you know, whatever. But I mostly spend my time opening a score with a lot of notes in it and some directives. And maybe I know something about the composer, or, you know, there's a lot of things on the score we could get into that are the ways into what this journey is going to be. So I guess practice is just kind of a precious practice of, you know, finding your way through a journey of as a player, as a performing on your instrument.
Do you find yourself now, is your main body of practice, it sounds like, based on what you said, you find that through the repertoire that you are playing or choosing to play or have coming up, rather than what might be the case for players who are just starting their journey, where there's, you know, a big chunk of time just, you know, we're just going to focus on, you know, this particular technique, or you know, building this thing. Do you, I know for myself, because practice time is limited now, most of my practice is for very specific things that I have coming up that I have to practice for.
Yeah.
And I sometimes do long for the luxury to have just time to, you know, just play and work on something and make my hands better.
Yeah, well, you're already touching on coming at this from different directions, which we do all the time as teachers. So as teachers, we're busy, and then our own practice is limited. And I just told a sophomore yesterday, as a teacher, I'm thinking back to when I was her age, I practiced 6 hours a day. And when I look back now, that was the money in the bank where I can get away now with very little time. So those early years in school are just, you know, I was just pedal to the metal of using time in a whole variety of ways. You can't be, you know, in fantastic brain power mode for 6 hours a day. You can maybe make those kinds of, you know, some really discovery, amazing connections for a couple hours a day, maybe, but you can still put in a lot of time, you know, like looking at, like, are my hands, you know, mirror work or something, or do my hands look the same? Do they feel the same? Do my fingers work the same? How are my subdivisions? I got to learn this lick. What's the sticking? How do I think about sticking? You know, things are, for students and even for us, we always have, part of practicing, I think, is that we often have multiple pots on the stove and things are at different points. So that's something that makes practice interesting, right? That you could like, this piece is like almost fully formed and I'm just trying to find how it breathes. So that's at a high level. And we might want to get to this later, but I kind of looked for that from the beginning, but it keeps evolving. Whereas something else is just like, oh, there's two nasty lines I have to figure out how to stick, or I figured out how to stick it yesterday and it was so damn clever, but I can't do it. So
right.
I go out. Or, you know, just things are at different stages. But yeah, the way you asked the last question made me think, as teachers, we're so aware of all the stages because we see so many students every day that have their own struggles of various interesting kinds with practice. And, you know, one reason I'm not a super active player at this point, but it really feels important to me to keep something of it alive because it changes how I talk to people about practicing and the daily work. So it feels like that's an important thing for me to have something going because I relate to them better.
Right. Yeah. I love the way that you put that in, because I've never thought about it that way, although I immediately understand what you're saying of just being, having moved, you know, through a career, basically being out of the student phase and into the professional level stage of life, that awareness of being able, you know, having the luxury of being able to look back. And I guess you can, I mean, that you can call that wisdom on some level of, you know, you have this understanding of hindsight and seeing how things have evolved, and especially as teachers, seeing how class of students after class of students have moved through a similar process. Seeing some of your former students, you know, in their professional careers, and you know, you can see that evolution, which is fascinating. And I guess what I'm getting at is sometimes I get frustrated in trying to translate, you know, this enormous importance of practice and just like how vital it is for our lives, especially when you're a student, translating that to a young percussionist, a young musician, and sometimes feeling like it's not landing, you know, my message isn't, but I guess that's just part of it.
I think that's just part of it. I find students have all different kinds of capacities to unravel what they need to do. Some are just, you know, really practical and see all these different angles they want to come at, and they're good at organizing their time so that it reflects or provides them all the time for all the different angles. And others just miss the boat on something, and sometimes it's you know, something we can impart something that makes it click so that they become more productive. And some of them are just so in their head. Like I grew up with, as a New England Conservatory student, as an undergrad, one of my best friends was a guy that just overthought everything so much that it almost paralyzed him. And I found him fascinating. And to the extent I tapped into what he was thinking, it was just a perfect extra deep thought for me on certain things. And then I could go back to not being that deep and get more done sometimes.
Right.
But that's important too. And also I kind of feel like somebody once said to me that she believes we all learn something when we're ready to learn it. So, and that's a tough thing about school, because sometimes, like when I was in school, I I, for better or for worse, my classes were not that hard, so I could just kind of not do much and practice 6 hours a day. And now I see some of my students have a little bit more rigorous course schedule, and I'm like, I could not have survived that. And for me, the stuff I learned in school wasn't the right time for me. So I got by, but it didn't stick. And that's always been frustrating for me. But so even to the extent that some people, going back to the friend I said who was too much in his head, maybe that was like the perfect way for him to be then, and he was gonna open into something else later. So, we're also layering onto this the construct of school and whether it's hitting people at the right time for them. Like some people freak out about taking a gap for a year or two between bachelor and master's. And I know some people for whom it was just so necessary, So there's a whole lot of different things happening at the same time, right? Like maybe the people we feel like we say something and it just falls flat, we could say the same thing 6 months later and they go, right. It's just the wrong time.
Yeah.
So.
I think that's a really, that's very perceptive. And it's as we think through all of this, I mean, even just this conversation, so much of what you're saying is really hitting home for me and resonating. And sometimes it's just, someone else saying it or putting it into slightly different words, hearing something outside of your own head. And even that, of course, can spill over into how we practice, how we learn to practice, how we teach our students to practice, whether it's as you said, maybe it's not the right time for this student to hear this thing. And I guess it could also be the case that, maybe the way I am telling this particular student, delivering this particular message, that isn't, resonating
Right.
with them.
So that's another thing you just made me think of. I'm sure you've experienced this where if we have a masterclass guest, for instance, one of the things that's happening in school is we're framing for young musicians like the way music works and the way to look at things and what's important and how to, hierarchies of values on your work. And so sometimes we're laying out a concept that just seems like, what? I don't get what you're saying. And then maybe a masterclass guest comes 2 weeks later. I've had this happen. And then I had a girl who's like heard the same thing from Emmanuel Sejourné came. She didn't know him. And then she's like, wait, he just said what you said 2 weeks ago. And then she's like, okay, I guess it's a thing.
Right.
I guess that way you frame that thing's a thing that musicians do.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I remember experiencing that, if I really think back to my student days as well. And yeah, whether it's, I guess, reinforcement of something that you've already heard or
using different words.
Sure. Yeah. Just delivered in a slightly different way that, because obviously we all receive things differently and it's not one size fits all. Mm-hmm. I find that really, really fascinating because I the longer that I do this, the teaching part of this, the more convinced I am that, the 70-80% of the equation is just figuring out, how to motivate students to dedicate themselves to their craft. And gosh, if they do that, and if they do that in a good environment where they're getting, the support and good instruction and all of that, but just they know how to engage and put in the time and work on becoming, the musician that they're going to become, that solves so many of the problems. And so I sort of obsess about how to how to deliver that message, how to say that,
There's also a thing about when we teach, there's so much going on in the lesson because the player is self-conscious that maybe they didn't just play it as well as they did before, and they're freaking out and they're not hearing us for a little while.
Right.
And, there's a lot going on. And so on occasion, I'm sure you've experienced this too, like I've had a lesson with someone that I thought was like, oh yeah, we really did great. And then I'll have dinner that night with our mutual good friend, Doug Perkins.
Right.
And he'll say, oh, I saw that same person later in the day, and she said it was so cool that you said this. And I thought, I don't think I said that.
Yeah.
And it's not that far off, but it's like, you heard that.
Right.
And I'm sure I do that too, when I'm in a situation and I'm nervous. So that's just a human thing that we can only process what we can process, and there's a lot going on. So occasionally I think now in certain cases at the end of a lesson to say, so what are the takeaways today?
Right.
If I'm wondering if I, maybe something was misconstrued or not, or seemed too complicated. Because I tend to teach from I think I can talk a bit convolutedly sometimes, or what appears that way. And I'm kind of going for something. I kind of want them to go, what is she saying? But then I take a risk with that. And then, with all teachers, I think that students need to have a certain trust, at least for a while, of like, I don't see where he's going, but I'm going to trust for a while.
Yeah.
And hopefully they start to see, yeah, we had all good intentions, and by even thinking a little obtusely, it opened up something important.
Right. Yeah. Do you, I'll kind of turn this back more towards you and your practice. Do you ever find yourself, or have you ever felt it necessary to sort of intentionally and radically change up your practice approach, your routine, from something as simple as how you walk into the room and what you start with, to, like just anything that gets you, sort of shakes you out of your normal existence of how we do this?
I don't know that I'm that organized. Well, I actually go between. I'm not that organized. And I'm also not that regular, to be totally honest.
Right.
So I kind of go between two different ways. One way is just kind of like floating to whatever I feel like playing. If I'm getting ready for something specific and I maybe have 8 pieces to learn, then I organize a practice chart where, I'm going to hit 2 or 3 pieces a day, but they're split up so that I'm going to hit one piece 4 times in the week, each piece 4 times in the week on different days. And that helps me just feel like I'm going to do something important on this one that day. One of the problems I feel if I'm in the floating mode and I haven't made a grid of, how to touch everything in a week, sometimes I'll be on one piece, and I think a lot of people experience this. You get onto one piece and you're like, wow, I'm really making some discoveries. I'm just cooking. Yeah, but damn, there's 3 other pieces I have to look at. So having a kind of a grid blocked out is peace of mind that if right. I plan to do this one for half an hour today, but I'm getting carried away and it's been an hour and a quarter.
Right.
You want to be able to get carried away too.
Right.
And then, okay, I didn't hit one of the pieces I meant to, but I'm going to do that tomorrow. It's on the chart. So yeah, just let it happen tomorrow.
Right.
But so okay. So now I've only just talked about the aspect of like actually hitting things, but getting to each piece.
Right.
In terms of how, the nuts and bolts of what I look at, I'm so right brain. No, I'm right brain.
Okay.
Right brain is the like, I just want to be dreamy.
Right.
In a piece, right? So I'm so right brain that I want, actually, I mentioned earlier, from the time I start learning a piece and from every moment that I start a practice with a piece, I'm just looking at it again from like, what could this be that could be even hipper than the last time I thought, what could this be? And so, and I'm that way from the moment I start even sight reading a piece. I want to know, like, what's it going to be that's going to be super cool? So I start to play some parts up to tempo. I tend to practice too much up at tempo.
Okay.
Which maybe isn't bad. So here's the thing with, I go back and I think you have to hit things from a lot of angles. I want to know what it feels like to play at tempo so that I can feel what it's going to be. And, is the wind in my hair? And what does this feel like? And then, of course, I'm going to be missing too many notes. So then I got to slow it back down and go, as I'm slower, it's important to not then just go into playing super mechanically, but to keep the wind in my hair feel, but it's just in slow motion.
Right.
Because then that's affecting like all the articulations and all the dynamics rather than just chunking it. So what bugs me is when, so I always encourage people to start from this, like, what is it? What is it really going to be? Even a piece that's like super hard, I'm just sight reading. If I can only get through a half a bar at tempo, I want to do that. I want to just go, oh God, it's going to be like that.
Right.
Because it's eye-opening to like, there's the danger, for instance, if you only go slow, you work out all the stickings. They don't work fast.
Right.
You got to work them out. You got to see like, oh, it goes like that.
Yeah.
Can I do that and then that in a row that fast?
Right.
So
right.
I'm kind of always working toward that, playing it in that ideal way. And I have to, because that's the only thing that interests me. It does not interest me to play like, just like I don't do any warm-ups at all.
Right.
They just don't interest me.
Right.
But what I do for a warm-up is in my book of what I'm playing at any given time, and anytime I'm learning a score, if there's a really tricky passage, I just put this big light pencil X in the margin of that staff, and that identifies all the trouble spots.
Okay.
And then that might be my starting point for the next day's practice. That's when I'm going to do slow. That's when I'm going to review the sticking. And so I make my warm up the part I need to work on more.
Right.
Rather than like the people who, sometimes I walk by practice rooms at school of people starting their hour-long workout of arpeggios or whatever, and I'm just like, oh, I couldn't get it if you paid me. But I also, some of them I mention, like, what's that doing for you?
Right.
And like, let's just think about it. And if they say, oh, I just love this, you got to do it if you just love it.
Right.
So I don't want to take that away from them if they love it, but I don't love it.
As you were talking about approaching things from different angles and sort of marrying together the idea of practicing up to tempo to understand what the thing's going to be, to inform, maybe how you have to build it or whatever. That's something that I fight and strive for, that I think I don't do very well. And again, to reference our mutual friend and colleague, Doug, this is where, for me, playing in a chamber music group has actually been really helpful. And I tell my students this all the time, that I am very much the slow practice, very meticulous. Like, I'm going to go just thing by thing until it's absolutely perfect. And then, but it takes forever. And yeah, I never see what the end result is supposed to be until months down the road. And,
we need to meld our brains.
Right. But the great thing is that Doug is exactly the opposite. And not that he's, not meticulous or anything, but he's big picture guy. So he's like, yeah, what's it going to be? So if we're building a new piece, he, days before I would ever want to try a full run of something, even remotely close to performance tempo, he's like, all right, let's throw on the recorder and let's just do a run. And I'm thinking, no, why would I want to do that? It's going to be terrible. I'm going to hit all the wrong notes and all, but of course it's incredibly beneficial to do that. I learned so much, and it's, it's a perfect example of exactly what you were talking about. For me, it gets me out of my comfort zone. My comfort zone is slow and steady. Where I'm uncomfortable is throwing myself into an environment where I don't have as much control, or I'm, I'm sensing that I don't have as much control. Mm-hmm. And so I love that you're able to do both of those things as an individual. I need a partner to do that. But
well, I'm not as good at the slow. I do way too little of that probably. But it's interesting picking duo partners, because I still play with Sharon Leventhal and Marimba occasionally, and why you stay with a duo partner is it's just they bring you what you need to make music.
Right.
Like she always plays from a score. She's always lining things up. And sometimes I can't, because I can't make the page turns if I have that many pages of score. And then it's even, I love stopping to do something slowly to tune chords with the violin, because then I balance my chords better and we hear everything better. And even just that relationship in particular is is home for me of making music, because just we like to go slow the same amount of times. and like finding someone that you can rehearse with really effectively, and then it feels like when you scream at the same time, it's like, I get what it is now, and it's so exciting to find someone that is your match for making music.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll do a final question. I want to be respectful of your time, but you've given so much good information that we could keep this going for another couple hours. But I'll give you a final question, and that is kind of a hypothetical. But if you, let's say next summer, you either you blocked out time, or just how the chips fell, you had nothing on the horizon, you had no have-tos in terms of stuff to learn. I've got this concert in the future. It was free, and you had, say, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks where you could actually just decide what you want to play. It's just you and your instrument. And so if we call you walking into a practice room or getting in front of your instrument every day practice on some level, what would you do? Would you rehash old repertoire that you haven't been able to play for 20 years because you just had so many other things to do? Would you just improvise for 4 weeks on your instrument because, gosh, who knows? Or if you had the luxury of that freedom, where would it take you?
I kind of had that this summer, except then I went off composing.
Okay.
I'm working on composing something at the moment. But I would continue. Another thing I started this summer was reading through a big, thick, spiral-bound book. I think it's like the size of a real book, called Piano Book, and I don't remember the author, but Christos Raphaelidis, a great jazz vibist, recommended that in a class of like, this book is as good as anything for getting through all jazz harmony.
Okay.
So that's something I want to do.
Yeah.
Improvising, I have a lot of discomfort with improvising. But I keep jazz is kind of my favorite thing I listen to. So that's a kind of a complicate or confusion in my life I haven't worked out yet. So where I end up having an outlet that is satisfying a lot is arranging.
Okay.
So I really love, I probably do a lot of arranging. I love sight reading through music of all genres and finding new things to adapt. And in some cases, like I did a Messiaen piece with clarinet that needed like a lot of notes taken out, but can I take that many, because I just love Messiaen colors, can I take out a lot and still, respect Messiaen? And I thought I did. So I love projects like that. So I would probably just delve into a lot of music that interests me and see what I can do with it. And is it adaptable? That's a big love. And somewhat, probably I would look for some new solo pieces. I don't find a lot of pieces I'm dying to play. And I think that's why I'm so attracted to adaptations, because there's thousands and thousands of great pieces out there that are, don't come by way of the marimba.
Right.
So if I can, I think as one thing for me has always been to find what I want to play. What do I need to play? And it's a constant struggle to find what I really, really want to play. And sometimes on programs that involves rehashing favorites. But I kind of try to always have something that's a new spin. So yeah, maybe that's the kind of the overarching thing is like, what is my real love of music I want to play?
Right.
And, because I feel like ultimately I want to play to talk, to say something through what I play and by my choices. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Great. All of this info is just so rich and informative, and I know for me has really kind of sent my brain into different places. So I thank you for that.
Thank you for suggesting this.
Yeah, of course. And I as I mentioned before we hit record, I think all of this can, the more we present this stuff and the more we hear each other's stories, especially for for students today, I just think it's, we're putting out opportunities for them to connect and to have those light bulb moments, and just as we were talking about, needing to hear it maybe this way or from this person or at this time, my hope can be that so much of what you've said here today can serve as that, people can just find it on the internet now. So anyway, thank you, Nancy, for doing this. I really, really appreciate it. And
thanks, Todd, and for all your videos. They're so entertaining and important too.
I appreciate that. Yeah. And fun. They make people laugh, hopefully.